Weeks after a huge release of documents related to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the National Archives has now started releasing information in connection with the assassination of his brother, Robert Bobby Kennedy, just a few years later. We're speaking with an expert about what new information, if any, was exposed in this new public trove of documents. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Okay, so we have another document dump, but this time of someone completely new. Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence, announced at the end of last week that previously unreleased documents connected to Senator Robert Kennedy's assassination in 1968, just 5 years after his brother, President John F. Kennedy, was gunned down in Dallas, Texas. And we have covered the massive document release related to JFK's death in a few Sidebar episodes. Check it out on the Law&Crime YouTube channel for a full breakdown. But in a similar fashion to that release, more than 10,000 pages of documentation was dropped for RFK in more than 200 PDFs. The collection of PDFs is not labeled. There seems to be no rhyme or reason to their order, very similar to what we saw with the JFK release. It's a lot of information to dig through. Now, we took a look at many of the documents over the weekend, so we want to break down what we found so far. First, quick history lesson. When John F. Kennedy was elected as president in 1960, his brother Robert was selected to serve as Attorney General and was one of JFK's closest advisors. He was heavily involved in the investigation and prosecution of organized crime figures like Jimmy Hoffa, supported Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, helped his brother navigate the Cuban Missile Crisis, and following JFK's assassination, RFK was considered to serve as Lyndon Johnson's vice president, but Johnson really wasn't on board, so Kennedy chose to run for the U.S. Senate in New York in 1964. In 1968, he announced he was running for president, but just months later, he would be dead. June 4th, 1968, RFK was in Los Angeles celebrating his win in the California and South Dakota primaries. He spoke to an excited crowd at the Ambassador Hotel and then left the stage. In a report that was among the massive document dump details what happened next. Quote, as Senator Kennedy and party were leaving embassy room through a kitchen exit, a series of shots were fired by unsub, subsequently identified as Sirhan Bashara Sirhan at Senator Kennedy. Senator Kennedy fell backward onto floor as Sirhan was wrestled by floor and disarmed by Senator Kennedy campaigners, formerly Olympic decathlon champion Rafer Johnson and Los Angeles Rams lineman Roosevelt Greer. Sirhan turned over to Los Angeles Police Department. Sirhan refused to admit identity to LAPD and carried no identification. Sirhan booked as John Doe on charge of assault with intent to commit murder. Senator Kennedy critically wounded with bullet in brain and another in right shoulder. Senator Kennedy immediately taken to Los Angeles Central Receiving Hospital for emergency treatment and thereafter transported to nearby Hospital of the Good Samaritan. 6 neurosurgeons at hospital operated on Senator Kennedy for about 4 hours to remove the .22 caliber bullets, which had fragmented into several parts into Senator Kennedy's right brain area. And RFK was pronounced dead 26 hours later after the shooting at 1:44 a.m. on June 6th. 5 other people were shot during this whole chaos. All of them recovered. Really, really sad event in our history. But who was this shooter, Sirhan Sirhan? Well, he's a Palestinian Jordanian man whose parents moved him and his siblings to the United States in the 1950s when he was 12 years old. Trained to be a horse jockey, lost his job after he was thrown from a horse, sustained this head injury, according to his family. And after they were able to identify Sirhan, investigators went to his family's home to search for evidence or a motive for the shooting. And the report from the document release reads, Adel Sirhan, brother of Sirhan Sirhan, accompanied by LAPD detectives, went to Sirhan family residence 696 East Howard, Pasadena. Sirhan Sirhan's room searched by LAPD after they received consent from brother. Page of handwriting bearing May 18, 68, 9:45 a.m., which contains numerous sentences, among which are my determination to eliminate RFK as becoming more of an unshakable obsession. RFK must die, RFK must be killed. Robert F. Kennedy must be assassinated. This statement repeated numerous times. On a card appears the statement, RFK must be disposed of like his brother was. Now, agencies investigating the shooting knew that they had to be extremely diligent, as evidenced in this letter from the United States Information Agency that was included in the document release as well. Quote, in view of the events surrounding the killing of President Kennedy's assassin 5 years ago, we should watch for and use any details on the legal rights being afforded the man under arrest in today's shooting. He has been offered the opportunity to have a lawyer, information of other rights, etc. And an FBI memo states that they want to know everything. All information, negative or positive, should be incorporated into an FD 302 as all information is being disseminated to the District Attorney, Los Angeles County. Took us a while to go through all this, including through lunch, through dinner, through snacks. And I'll tell you what, I'm very particular about what I put into my body. And honestly, shopping for healthy food, not easy. It's actually tough to know what's actually good for you, but that is why I'm so pumped to have Thrive Market now sponsoring Sidebar, giving us something to do while we're working on all these cases. So Thrive Market is a go-to online grocery store for getting healthy essentials. And one of the things I love is their shopping experience, because as a Thrive Market member, you can customize the assortment of products in just a few clicks based on your preferences and diet. You can filter the products to get exactly what you're looking for. Like, instead of chomping on candy, I found these amazing organic avocado oil chips that are perfect for that midday craving. Also, super eco-conscious. All their products are shipped from their zero-waste warehouses. Everything is delivered straight to your door, so you don't even have to leave your house. If you're ready to make healthy food shopping as easy as a few clicks, check out Thrive Market, scan the QR code on screen, click the link in the description, or head over to thrivemarket.com/sidebar to get 30% off of your first order and a free gift when you join Thrive Market today. During a June 9th interview, Sirhan apparently admitted his guilt in a recorded confession while in police custody. His motive is believed to have been connected to conflict in the Middle East and the Kennedys' response to it, but Sirhan also maintained that he has no memory of the shooting or the aftermath. Now, a judge didn't accept the confession. Sirhan went to trial, where he was found guilty in April 1969 of first-degree murder and 4 counts of assault with a deadly weapon with intent to commit murder. He was sentenced to death by the gas chamber, but a few years later in 1972, after a court ruling over the misuse of the death penalty, his sentence was commuted to life in prison. And attorneys have filed several appeals over the years claiming that Sirhan may have been hypnotized during the attack, but all those appeals were denied. And right now, he's still incarcerated at the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility out in San Diego, the same prison where other notorious criminals are housed, including the Menendez brothers, Suge Knight. He's been up for parole several times, including in 2022, when the state parole board actually recommended he be released, but Governor Gavin Newsom actually struck down that decision, saying Sirhan had refused to accept responsibility for the crime. And despite the horrific nature of this shooting, Sirhan has had many supporters over the years who believe in his innocence, including, by the way, it appears, RFK's own son, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the current Health and Human Services Secretary under President Donald Trump. Eyewitnesses have indicated that there was a second gunman who killed the senator. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr., by the way, visited Sirhan in prison in 2017, and after that gave his support for a reinvestigation of the assassination and for Sirhan to be paroled. Other members of the Kennedy family have strongly opposed release for the now 81-year-old, though. Again, as with the JFK release, there seems to be very little that's groundbreaking or new in these files, but it definitely provides a lot more context and just more of a view, I guess. According to the Associated Press, many of the files had been previously released or were just recently digitized after sitting in storage, but there are nuggets of new information that are buried inside. And that is what we want to talk about. Okay, so to break all this down, I want to welcome back to the show Professor Larry Sabato, professor of politics at the University of Virginia, founder, director of the Center for Politics. It's so good to see you again, Professor. I want to start off right off the bat. I want to know from you, what was the most interesting or important thing you saw in the latest document dump when it comes to RFK?
I saw a lot about the assassination and, frankly, the poor investigation that followed it from the Los Angeles Police Department. The police chief actually said to his investigators, "I don't want another conspiracy theory like Dallas." But I don't think the police chief should say that to investigators before they do their work. And so they minimize some of the very conflicted statements of witnesses. They actually discourage some of them from submitting statements about a potential other gunman there. And I should state, I think Sirhan was the, or one of, and probably the gunman in the kitchen. But his people were discouraging some of the individuals from suggesting there was more than one. They were discouraging people from reporting about the so-called girl in the polka dot dress, which several people said They overheard her saying, "We shot him, we shot him."
Mm-hmm.
And she was fleeing. Now, maybe they misinterpreted what she was saying, or maybe they misconstrued the way she was presenting herself. Several women came into the LA Police Department and said they were the polka dot girl dress person. And the police didn't even record their names, and they called them psychos. Now, maybe they were, but wouldn't you think you would at least record the names of people who were coming in and confessing? And if you were working for the LA Police Department at that time, you would have listened to your chief say, "I don't want any conspiracy theories like Dallas."
Yeah.
So that's a good reason for sending them away. But I think it's significant that you had several of them. Obviously, they couldn't have all been the woman in the polka dot dress. Maybe none of them were. But this should have been investigated. Lots of things should have been investigated rather than putting it all in a nice, neat package with a bow on it when it wasn't ready for the bow. So there are a lot of questions, and there are so many pieces to this, and it's as unexamined compared to the JFK assassination.
Which I think why there's a lot of interest in this release as well. You know, there's conspiracy theories they ran wild after RFK was killed. My understanding is the FBI investigated the theories on behalf of the U.S. Senate, found most of them to be untrue, found them to be untrue. I mean, the most prevalent, again, like JFK, is the second gunman theory. There are some who believe that Sirhan was hypnotized into shooting RFK like a Manchurian candidate, activated to commit the crime and have no memory of it afterwards. There's been rumors that the CIA was involved in the assassination. Anything from the document release that touches upon any of that?
Not that we've seen so far. I'm sure as we get further into the 10,000 pages, and there's more to come, we'll probably find information about these other theories. What was interesting again to me was that Sirhan was not the innocent party that some people have presented him as being. Now, if he was hypnotized, he would have had to have been hypnotized sometime before the assassination, because right after the Martin Luther King assassination, Sirhan got into an argument with his garbage collector. The garbage collector was black and was saying good things about RFK, and Sirhan, according to the garbage collector's sworn statement, said, "Well, I'm going to kill that son of a." And of course, there are writings just within the very close period prior to the actual assassination where he said he would kill RFK, or RFK must die, or he needs to be disposed of the same way his brother was. Mm-hmm. That was, in my view anyway, a new element. I'd never seen that envelope before that was found in Sirhan's room in Pasadena, California. Let me also mention, this was interesting to me. I had never come across the fact that Sirhan had been there for some time. In fact, prior to the assassination, he'd been casing other joints like the RFK headquarters in LA. But what was interesting to me was that on 3 separate occasions that night in the Ambassador Hotel, Kennedy's staff had to pull him off the platform where RFK was going to speak or was speaking. He was already up there speaking, giving his last speech. It's on to Chicago and let's win there. He had also been in the press gaggle. Had no business being there. He was spotted and dragged out of there. He was also spotted in the patio right off the ballroom where Kennedy delivered that speech, looking very grim, very unhappy, according to a witness who said, "I figured he was just a Gene McCarthy supporter." So, when you start to add the pieces together, I think it's very difficult to exonerate Sirhan. Now, you can make the claim about hypnotism. Where's the evidence? Back then, now, and you had plenty of investigators outside of LA looking at this. The LA police did not do a very good job of investigating. Well, no surprise there. We saw the same thing in Dallas.
Yeah, that spotlight put on investigators has become a common theme now from what we're seeing in these releases. And I wanted your opinion about something. So some of these conspiracies surrounding the tragedy are seen in letters that are written to President Lyndon Johnson, his successor, President Richard Nixon, and their attorney generals by members of the public. And hundreds of those letters were included in this release. Some were typed, others were handwritten, a few were even sent by telegram. And it's kind of fascinating to see reactions from the American people. For example, a woman named Conception from California wrote to President Johnson saying, "Is there any way they could torture Sirhan into telling who is behind all of this? We all know it's communist, so why can't someone torture him to find out who is behind all of this and do something about it?" A telegram received in the days after the shooting, signed by several people, stated, "Please do not try to tell the American people there's no evidence of conspiracy in the attempted assassination of Robert Kennedy when you haven't even had time to investigate. You should assume there is a conspiracy in all of these assassinations until proven otherwise." And then you have a man named John from Oregon who said that Sirhan should be tried in federal court, not state court, and suggested if this type of thing continues, then dueling must again be made legal so that an honorable man may at least have some defense against his suspected enemies. Now, Professor, I wasn't around at that time, but I do think it's interesting to see these letters and whether or not they represent a large segment of the population who was frustrated, dissatisfied, curious, skeptical, or it was outliers. I mean, what did you make of those letters?
Oh, no, I would say that while they went further than most people would have gone, and they were extreme in some cases, having lived through it, I can tell you there was tremendous unhappiness and dissatisfaction with the fact that JFK had been assassinated. And then just 2 months earlier, almost to the day, Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. And now Robert F. Kennedy. And people could not believe it was happening again. And people saw the society becoming unstable as a consequence. They were also deeply suspicious that someone or something was behind these assassinations, taking out some of the best people in the country, as many of them put it. There was also anger at President Johnson because of lots of things, especially Vietnam, but he was a well-known critic of RFK, and RFK was of him as well. And of course, Johnson had been suspected by some, I think inappropriately, of being involved in JFK's assassination. So we were already in a full-blown conspiracy mode looking at the JFK assassination. And we just started looking at conspiracies surrounding Martin Luther King. And I think there may actually be something there. So people were inclined to believe that this couldn't just happen. Well, unfortunately, history shows us over and over again, not just the history of the United States, the history of the world, other countries, that sometimes things do happen this way. I'm not saying it necessarily did, but the fact that there were these 3 very prominent assassinations, and 2 of them within 2 months, does not suggest there was an overall conspiracy by the CIA or by the Russians or the Cubans or this group or that group. You have to look at each case separately. I do believe that given what we had just gone through with Martin Luther King and the JFK assassination, you would have thought that law enforcement officials, and not just in LA, would have taken this very seriously from the very beginning. And again, there have been pieces of evidence destroyed by the LA Police Department in the subsequent years. Again, why would you ever destroy anything related to the assassination of a leading presidential candidate? This just feeds people's cynicism about who's behind the assassinations. They're unwilling to accept that an individual did it.
And with that in mind, there was this very pointed critique that was mailed to Congressman William Bates of Massachusetts, and it was from a woman named Lenora, who describes herself as, quote, as a 25-year-old housewife who can only grit her teeth, wave an angry fist in the air, and curse the person or persons behind these murders. And her long letter says, in part, invaluable information pertaining to the murder of President Kennedy has been locked away somewhere and cannot be revealed until the year 2039, 75 years from now. I can assure you that in my own circle of friends, this is a real bugaboo. Question, who in 75 years will care as much as we, the people who are living now? More to the point, what in 75 years will anyone be able to do about it? And the document release also includes information from interviews with every single person registered at the Ambassador Hotel on the night Senator Kennedy was shot, letters, reactions from foreign leaders, background details about Sirhan's attorney, newspaper clippings that detail the aftermath investigation. Professor, your thoughts on these materials?
Well, again, it speaks to the public's view of all this, and that it hadn't been properly explained or thoroughly explained, and they just weren't buying it. Some were willing to buy Lee Harvey Oswald. They were not willing to buy Sirhan or James Earl Ray for Martin Luther King. They wanted more information, and they wanted it now, not locked away for 60 years or 75 years or whatever it turned out to be. What I think they didn't fully appreciate is that the people who could have prevented these assassinations really didn't do their jobs. They missed clear signs, clear signals, and that was the primary reason why these materials were locked away for so along. As far as Kennedy is concerned, the worst part of this release, and I have to mention this because it's upset the Kennedys tremendously, not RFK, but his siblings. They included in this release the most grotesque, awful autopsy photos that I've ever come across, including the ones that were never released for JFK, but some leaked out. Why would you do that without the full permission of the family? And they were not asked. Now, they have their theory about how they got out. They believe one member of the family gave the okay to do it, but they were not asked. They're extremely upset about it. It is deeply offensive. And, we used to call this common decency. And what happened to common decency? That you would release something like this, and they're awful. I hope people will not go to them. There's no reason for anyone to see them, maybe other than a forensics researcher. I wonder what is behind all of this now. Is it an attempt to get every single bit of information they want the public to see out there in public? Yeah. Do they have any judgment left? I don't know.
So it's interesting you say that, because this document release, it comes after the executive order that was signed by President Donald Trump that called for any and all remaining documents related to the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, RFK, Martin Luther King Jr. to be released to the public. And in fact, in an interview with the Daily Wire, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard said, "There's no smoking gun, but there are a lot of interesting things that have not been previously known that really call into question what really happened and who was behind it. There are more questions than answers, and there's so much more ultimately that I think needs to be declassified and digitized so that anybody can access this and know what the government knows." What's your reaction to that, Professor?
Well, I agree with her, and I don't agree with Tulsi Gabbard on lots of things, but I agree with her on this. And then let's remember, she's in the same cabinet as RFK Jr., and I think she's trying to take his views into account because, as you know, for years he has said the CIA did it. Again, where's the evidence? I believe they covered up various things because they had not produced evidence in advance of the assassination that might have prevented it. There's every reason to look into this. And you just reminded me of another bit besides the polka dot dress girl. There was a man who's never been identified who's called the briefcase man. And there are multiple witnesses who heard him say, "I've got dynamite in this briefcase, dynamite news in this briefcase," not actual dynamite, "and it's going to blow this race wide open by the end of the evening." And one person tried to reach out and touch the briefcase because there was a bulge in it that was the size of a gun. And the man quickly withdrew the briefcase and went elsewhere in the ballroom. It could have been innocent. It could also have suggested guilt. He was never identified. I don't think those witnesses were encouraged to think of other details that they hadn't added in because they wanted to get this over with, just like Lyndon Johnson wanted to get the investigation by the Warren Commission over with months before he faced the voters in November of 1964. So there are other motives at work here other than finding out the full truth. And it is disgraceful that it has taken so many years to get these materials. There are still a few redacted parts that I've seen, but we're supposed to be getting more. And I give them credit. I give the Trump people credit for actually doing what other presidents said they would do and never got around to doing.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk a little bit more about the specifics of what was released. And by the way, I encourage everybody to go check out the Center for Politics at UVA. It's at Center for Politics on X. You released about 13 different points that you think were of interest. And there's a lot about Sirhan Sirhan. In fact, one says that he was a malingerer, somebody who pretends to be sick. There was also more information about what he viewed regarding Lyndon Johnson, right?
Yes, he had claimed he had advocated for the overthrow of Lyndon Johnson and that he still believed that, essentially. This was after he was caught, obviously. And there are other violent episodes in his past. He went to a doctor who eventually evaluated that he was a malingerer. And he was asking this doctor to send a letter certifying that he was ill and needed to get sustenance and support on account of that. And the doctor refused to do it because he didn't believe him. He thought he was making it up. And then Sirhan threatened him. So you look for episodes like this to indicate that a person has a violent bent. And again, I'm not criticizing all of those who don't believe in the single person assassination theory for RFK. But what I'm suggesting is before you exonerate Sirhan Sirhan, you really ought to examine some of this new evidence because it doesn't suggest that Sirhan Sirhan was a peaceful, sweet human being.
No, I think that's very fair. And again, when we spoke earlier about where he was at multiple locations, That's quite concerning. And there was also, I'm looking right now, that the files contain photos of Sirhan's car, right? Had you seen that before? I mean, this is interesting,
No.
these photos that pop up as well.
No, I had never seen that. I didn't realize that they had a couple of cartridges from 22. So well, he had the gun. He clearly had a gun. Some people say he didn't fire it. No, he fired it. People go to great lengths to prove there was a conspiracy by exonerating the person who was clearly involved. Now, maybe they weren't the only person. I'm not denying that possibility. But you don't exonerate the assassin. The same thing was done and is still being done with Lee Harvey Oswald.
Professor Larry Sabato, I really, really appreciate you taking the time and coming on here. And look, if they release more files and there's something that happens, would love to have you back on to talk more about it. But always appreciate your expertise and your research into this.
Enjoy being with you, Jesse. It's always fun.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.